The scorching Texas sun beat down mercilessly on Beatrice Rawlins as she crawled across the blistering desert sand, each movement sending waves of agony through her battered body. Blood trickled from her split lip, mixing with the dirt and tears on her face as she clawed desperately forward, the horizon wavering in the heat. Her once beautiful blue dress was now torn and stained with blood, her belongings stolen, her hope nearly extinguished in the unforgiving June heat of 1875. "Water," she rasped, her parched throat barely able to form the word as she collapsed onto the burning sand. The men who had attacked her stagecoach, beaten her, and left her for dead were long gone with everything of value she'd possessed. At 22, Beatrice had left behind everything she knew in Boston to start anew in the West, only to find herself dying alone in the Texas desert. As consciousness began to slip away, the rhythmic pounding of hooves vibrated through the ground beneath her cheek. A shadow fell across her face, blocking the brutal sun. Through swollen eyelids, she glimpsed a tall figure dismounting from a dappled gray horse. Strong hands gently turned her over, and a deep voice murmured words she couldn't quite understand. "Madam, can you hear me?" The voice was concerned, gentle despite its roughness. "Lord Almighty, what happened to you?" The stranger carefully lifted her head, and Beatrice felt the cool blessing of water against her cracked lips. She drank desperately, choking slightly as the precious liquid slid down her parched throat. "Easy now," the man cautioned, supporting her head with a calloused hand. "Not too fast." Beatrice managed to open her eyes fully, finding herself looking up into the most striking face she'd ever seen. Sun-bronzed skin, worry lines creasing his forehead beneath a battered cowboy hat, and eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue. A day's worth of stubble darkened his strong jaw, and concern was etched across his features. "Thank you," she whispered hoarsely. "Name's Isaac Flynn," he said, continuing to help her drink. "Got a ranch about 5 miles from here. Can you tell me who did this to you?" Beatrice tried to speak, but a wave of dizziness overcame her, and she felt herself slipping back into unconsciousness. The last thing she remembered was being lifted into strong arms, the scent of leather and horses surrounding her as darkness claimed her once more. When Beatrice awoke, she was lying on a simple bed in a sparsely furnished room. Clean white curtains billowed gently from an open window, bringing the scent of sage and desert air. For a moment, panic seized her as she tried to remember where she was and how she'd gotten there. The events of the attack came rushing back, and she attempted to sit up, only to gasp in pain. "Whoa there," came a female voice. "You're still too hurt to be moving around like that." An older woman with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun approached the bed, her weathered face kind but stern. "Where am I?" Beatrice managed, her voice still rough. "Flynn Ranch, about 20 miles outside of Sweetwater," the woman replied, helping Beatrice take a small sip of water from a tin cup. "I'm Martha, the housekeeper. Isaac brought you in 2 days ago, half dead from the heat and that beating. Doc Jenkins has been by twice to check on you." 2 days, Beatrice whispered, alarmed. Martha nodded. "You've had a fever. Isaac was mighty worried, hasn't left the house much, keeps asking if you've woken up." As if summoned by his name, there was a knock at the door, and Isaac Flynn stepped into the room. Without his hat, Beatrice could see his thick black hair was slightly too long, curling at the nape of his neck. His gray-blue eyes brightened when he saw she was awake. "You're back with us," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Was starting to think you might never wake up." "Thank you for saving my life," Beatrice said, trying to smile despite her split lip. "Any decent man would have done the same," he replied, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Not all men are decent," she whispered, memories of her attackers flashing through her mind. Isaac's jaw tightened. "No, they surely aren't. When you're feeling stronger, I'd like to know what happened. Sheriff needs to be told." "I'll leave you two to talk," Martha said, patting Beatrice's hand. "But don't tire her out, Isaac. She needs rest." After Martha left, Isaac pulled a chair beside the bed. "I don't even know your name, madam." "Beatrice Rawlins," she replied. "I was on the stagecoach from San Antonio heading to Sweetwater." "What business did you have in Sweetwater?" he asked, his expression curious but not intrusive. Beatrice hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger. But he had saved her life, and something in his honest gaze made her trust him. I was to be the new schoolteacher, she explained. I answered an advertisement from the town council, left everything behind in Boston for the position. Isaac nodded. Sweetwater's been trying to get a proper schoolteacher for months now. Last one couldn't handle the conditions out here, went back east after just 6 weeks. Well, I doubt they'll still want me now, Beatrice said softly, gesturing to her face. I must look a fright, and all my references and credentials were in my trunk, which those men stole. Don't you worry about that just yet, Isaac said firmly. First, we need to get you well, then we'll sort everything else out. He hesitated, then asked, Can you tell me what happened? Who did this to you? Beatrice closed her eyes briefly, the memories painful. 3 men stopped the stagecoach about 10 miles outside of town. They were dressed like cowboys, but their faces were covered. They shot the driver, Mr. Calloway. There was another passenger, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Phillips. They killed him when he tried to protect me. Her voice broke, and Isaac wordlessly handed her a handkerchief. They took everything of value, she continued after composing herself. When I fought back, they beat me. The last thing I remember before they left me in the desert was one of them saying I was too much trouble to bother with. I thought I was going to die out there. Isaac's expression had darkened with each word of her story. Sounds like the Garfield gang. They've been terrorizing stage coaches around these parts for months now. Sheriff Campbell hasn't been able to catch them. Will you tell the sheriff what happened? She asked. First thing tomorrow, he promised. But for now, you need to rest. Martha will be mighty upset with me if I keep you talking too long. As if to confirm his words, Beatrice felt exhaustion sweeping over her again. I don't want to be a burden to you, she murmured. Isaac stood, his tall frame casting a shadow across the bed. No burden, Miss Rawlins. You just focus on healing up. Everything else will sort itself out. As he turned to leave, Beatrice caught his hand impulsively. Thank you, Mr. Flynn, not just for the water, but for everything. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or something deeper before he gently extracted his hand from hers. Get some rest now, he said quietly, and left the room. The next few days passed in a blur of sleep and gradually decreasing pain. Martha tended to Beatrice with brisk efficiency, helping her bathe and changing the bandages on the worst of her injuries. Doc Jenkins, a jovial man with spectacles and a bushy mustache, visited again and pronounced her healing nicely. You're a strong young woman, Miss Rawlins, he said approvingly. Another week of rest and you'll be up and about. Isaac came by her room each day, sometimes bringing wildflowers he'd picked on his rounds of the ranch, other times just sitting quietly while she ate the soup or stew Martha had prepared. They talked about small things, the weather, the horses he was training, books they had both read. He never pressed her for more details about the attack, though she knew he had ridden into Sweetwater to speak with the sheriff. On the 5th day, Beatrice felt strong enough to get out of bed and sit by the window. Martha had given her a simple cotton dress to replace her ruined one, and though it was a bit large, it felt good to be properly clothed again. Looking out at the vast expanse of the Flynn ranch, Beatrice was struck by its rugged beauty. The main house sat on a small rise, with corrals and outbuildings spreading out below. In the distance, cattle grazed on the scrubby grass, and beyond them, the land rose into rocky hills. It was nothing like the lush greenery of Massachusetts, where she'd grown up, yet there was something compelling about the harsh landscape. She was still gazing out when she heard a commotion from the yard below. Leaning forward, she saw Isaac dismounting from his horse, deep in conversation with another man. Their voices carried through the open window. Campbell says they've been seen near the Carson Creek crossing, the stranger was saying. Thinks they might be planning to hit the Stockton payroll wagon when it comes through next week. That's mighty close to here, Tom, Isaac replied, his voice grim. And with what they did to Miss Rawlins and those poor men on the stagecoach, they're getting bolder. Sheriff's putting together a posse, the man called Tom said. Wants to know if you're in. There was a pause before Isaac answered. I can't leave right now, not with Miss Rawlins still recovering. The school teacher, how's she doing? Better. She's strong, but she's been through hell. The men moved away, their voices fading, but Beatrice remained at the window, troubled by what she'd overheard. Was Isaac staying behind because of her? The thought that she might be preventing him from joining the effort to capture her attackers filled her with guilt. That evening, when Isaac brought a tray with her dinner, Beatrice confronted him. "I heard you talking with your friend today," she said without preamble. "About the men who attacked me." Isaac's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You shouldn't be worrying about that, Miss Rawlins. How can I not?" She countered, "And please call me Beatrice. After all you've done for me, formality seems unnecessary." A small smile quirked the corner of his mouth. "Beatrice, then, and I'm Isaac." "Isaac," she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her lips. "I don't want to be the reason you're not joining the posse to catch these men." He set the tray down on the small table by her bed. "That's not for you to worry about." "But it is," she insisted. "These men killed 2 innocent people and left me to die. I don't want them to hurt anyone else because you felt obligated to stay and look after me." Isaac studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "It's not obligation," he finally said, "and I'm not the only capable man in the county. Sheriff Campbell and the others will manage." "But Beatrice," he interrupted gently, "I made a choice. I respect that you feel strongly about this, but I've made my decision. Now eat your dinner before it gets cold." Though she wanted to argue further, something in his tone made her hold her tongue. As they ate together in companionable silence, Beatrice found herself studying Isaac when he wasn't looking. There was a solidity to him, a quiet strength that she found reassuring. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the Boston men she'd known, but there was something infinitely more appealing about his weathered features and direct gaze. The thought startled her. It wasn't appropriate to be having such thoughts about a man she barely knew, especially one who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. She attributed it to gratitude and her still weakened state, but couldn't entirely dismiss the flutter in her stomach when he smiled at her. The following day, Beatrice felt strong enough to venture downstairs. With Martha hovering anxiously nearby, she made her way slowly down the wooden staircase and into the main living area of the ranch house. It was a large, open room with a stone fireplace at one end and well-worn but comfortable furniture arranged for conversation. Bookshelves lined one wall, surprisingly well-stocked for a ranch house in the middle of Texas. Isaac's mother was a great reader, Martha explained, noticing Beatrice's interest in the books. Brought most of those volumes with her when she and Isaac's father came out west from Virginia. Isaac keeps adding to the collection whenever he can get new ones. "It's a wonderful library," Beatrice said sincerely. "You're welcome to borrow anything that catches your eye," came Isaac's voice from behind her. Turning, Beatrice saw him standing in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. He'd clearly just come in from working, his shirt damp with sweat and dust clinging to his boots, but he smiled warmly at the sight of her up and about. "It's good to see you on your feet," he said. "It feels good to be vertical again," she replied with a smile. "Though I confess I'm already a bit tired from just coming downstairs." "That's to be expected," Martha interjected. "You're healing, but you need to take it slow. Come sit down before you fall down." Beatrice allowed herself to be guided to a comfortable armchair, and Martha bustled off to make tea, leaving her alone with Isaac. He took a seat across from her, stretching his long legs out in front of him. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment, "about your situation." Beatrice tensed slightly. Her situation was indeed precarious. She had no money, no belongings, and her position in Sweetwater was uncertain at best. "Yes, I rode into town yesterday and spoke with Mayor Wilson about the schoolteacher position, told him what happened to you." "And?" she asked, her heart beating faster. "They still want you for the job," Isaac said with a small smile. "School's been closed since the last teacher left, and the children are running wild, according to Mrs. Wilson. But there's a problem with the accommodations." Beatrice nodded. Most small towns provided housing for their teachers, usually a small cottage or rooms in someone's home. "The teacherage was damaged in a storm last month," Isaac continued. "Roof got torn half off, and it won't be repaired for at least another few weeks. Mayor was wondering if you might stay on here at the ranch until it's ready, since you're already here recovering." Beatrice's eyes widened in surprise. That's very generous, but I couldn't impose on you for weeks. You've already done so much. Isaac shrugged. It's no imposition. Ranch house is plenty big, and it's only about a 20-minute ride into town. I could take you in each morning for school and bring you back in the afternoons. But that would be such a disruption to your work, she protested. I go into town regular anyway for supplies, he countered. It'd be no trouble. Before Beatrice could respond, Martha returned with a tray of tea and biscuits. Isaac Flynn, you go wash up before you sit on that clean furniture, she scolded. You're tracking dirt all through the house. Isaac grinned sheepishly and stood. Yes, madam, he said with exaggerated deference, then looked back at Beatrice. Think about my offer. No need to decide right away. As he strode from the room, Beatrice found herself watching his retreating form with more interest than was entirely proper. There was something about the way he moved, with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, that she found fascinating. That man, Martha muttered, pouring tea, never did learn to wipe his boots properly before coming inside. His mother would have had his hide. How long have you worked for the Flynn family? Beatrice asked, accepting the cup of tea gratefully. Going on 30 years now, Martha replied, settling into a chair with her own cup. Came to work for Isaac's parents when he was just a boy. His father, William, built this place up from nothing. Good man, but tough, died 10 years back from pneumonia. His mother, Elizabeth, passed 2 years after that. Isaac's been running things alone ever since. No wife? Beatrice asked before she could stop herself, then blushed at her forwardness. Martha didn't seem to notice her discomfort. There was a girl once, about 4 years ago. Caroline Whitfield, daughter of a banker from Austin, pretty little thing but not cut out for ranch life. Broke things off after 6 months and married a lawyer instead. She sniffed disapprovingly. Isaac took it hard, threw himself into work. Haven't seen him show interest in anyone since, until she stopped abruptly, busying herself with straightening the tea tray. Until, Beatrice prompted, curiosity piqued, Martha gave her a shrewd look. Until he came riding in with you half dead in his arms. Never seen him so worried about anyone. Barely left your side those first 2 days when the fever was bad. Beatrice felt her cheeks warm again, but before she could formulate a response, the front door opened, and a tall, lanky young man with a shock of red hair burst in. Mr. Flynn. Mr. Flynn, he called excitedly. That paint mare's foaling, Martha sighed. Calm down, Billy, before you break something. Mr. Flynn's washing up. As if on cue, Isaac reappeared, his face and hands clean, his hair damp. What's this about the paint? She's foaling, sir. Hank sent me to fetch you right away. Says it don't look right. Isaac's expression turned serious. Martha, keep an eye on Miss Rawlins. I might be a while. He grabbed his hat from a hook by the door and was gone before Beatrice could even say goodbye. Always something on a ranch, Martha muttered, collecting the cups. That mare's been his pet project, paid good money for her, hoping to improve his stock. Beatrice watched through the window as Isaac and the boy called Billy ran toward the barns. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in Isaac's shoulders, his concern for the animal evident in his hurried stride. He has a good heart, she said softly, almost to herself. Martha glanced at her, something knowing in her gaze. That he does, Miss Rawlins, that he does. The day stretched into evening, and there was no sign of Isaac. Beatrice, tired from her first excursion downstairs, retired early but found sleep elusive. Her mind kept returning to Isaac's offer about the teaching position and his willingness to accommodate her until the teacherage was repaired. Such generosity from a virtual stranger was unexpected, yet she didn't sense any ulterior motives behind it. Just as she was finally drifting off, a soft knock at her door roused her. Yes, she called, sitting up in bed. The door opened slightly, and Isaac's voice came through the gap. Sorry to disturb you, Beatrice. Just wanted to let you know the foal made it. Thought you might be wondering. That's wonderful news, she replied, genuinely pleased. Was there a problem? Foal was turned wrong, he explained. Had to help get it positioned right. Both mare and baby are doing fine now. I'm glad, Beatrice said sincerely. You must be exhausted. There was a brief pause. It's been a long day, he admitted. I'll let you get your rest. Good night, Beatrice. Good night, Isaac, she replied, and heard his footsteps retreating down the hallway, Settling back against her pillows, Beatrice found herself smiling. The thought of Isaac rushing to tell her about the foal, even though it was late, warmed her heart. There was a gentleness to him that belied his rough exterior, a kindness that seemed to extend to everyone and everything under his care. For the first time since the attack, Beatrice felt truly safe. And with that feeling came the first stirrings of hope that perhaps her decision to come west hadn't been a mistake after all. The next few days saw Beatrice growing steadily stronger. She began taking short walks outside, marveling at the vastness of the Texas landscape. The stark beauty of the arid land, so different from the verdant hills of Massachusetts, had an austere appeal that was growing on her. Isaac, when not busy with ranch work, often accompanied her on these walks, pointing out native plants and animals, sharing stories of his childhood on the ranch. Beatrice found herself looking forward to these moments together, enjoying his quiet companionship and dry humor. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Beatrice finally gave him her answer. "I've decided to accept the teaching position," she said, "and your kind offer to stay here until the teacherage is repaired." Isaac's face lit up with a genuine smile that made her heart skip a beat. "That's fine news. The children of Sweetwater will be lucky to have you." "I hope I can live up to expectations," she said, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "My credentials were lost, and I have no teaching materials." "Mayor Wilson said the school has some books and supplies," Isaac reassured her. "And as for your credentials, he's willing to take my word about your character." Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "Your word carries that much weight in Sweetwater," Isaac shrugged modestly. "Flynn Ranch is one of the largest employers in the county. And my father served as mayor for 2 terms before he got sick. People around here still remember him with respect." "You have big boots to fill," Beatrice observed. A shadow crossed Isaac's face. "That I do, not always sure I'm up to it." The vulnerability in his admission touched Beatrice. "From what I've seen, you're doing a fine job," she said softly. "This is a well-run ranch and your people clearly respect you." Isaac looked at her, surprise and gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you for saying that," he said quietly. "It means more than you might think." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. Beatrice was acutely aware of Isaac beside her, the subtle scent of leather and soap that seemed to cling to him, the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling evening air. "Mayor Wilson wants to know if you could start next Monday," Isaac said eventually. "Give you the weekend to prepare. School's been closed for nearly a month now." "Monday," Beatrice repeated. That gave her just 5 days to prepare lessons and get ready to face a classroom of children she'd never met. "Yes, I think I can be ready by then. I'll take you into town tomorrow to meet him properly and see the schoolhouse," Isaac offered. "And maybe we can find you some clothes and personal items to replace what was stolen. There's a decent general store, and Mrs. Abernathy does dressmaking." "That's very thoughtful," Beatrice said, touched by his consideration, "but I have no money. Everything I had was in my trunk." Isaac waved away her concern. "Consider it an advance on your salary. Mayor Wilson already agreed to it." "You've thought of everything," she said, feeling a wave of gratitude toward this man who'd done so much for her. "Just trying to help you get back on your feet," he replied, looking slightly embarrassed by her gratitude. As they continued to sit in the gathering darkness, Beatrice found herself studying Isaac's profile, strong and steady against the star-filled sky. She'd never met a man like him before, straightforward, kind, without the pretensions and artifice of the men she'd known back east. There was a solidity to him that she found increasingly attractive. Catching herself in these thoughts, Beatrice looked away quickly. It wouldn't do to develop feelings for Isaac Flynn. Once the teacherage was repaired, she would be moving into town, establishing herself as Sweetwater's schoolteacher. Romance had no place in her plans, especially after what had happened with Edward back in Boston. The memory of her former fiancé's betrayal still stung, even after nearly a year. She'd trusted him completely, only to discover he'd been courting her for her small inheritance while carrying on with another woman. The humiliation had been a significant factor in her decision to answer the advertisement for a teacher in the far-off town of Sweetwater, Texas. "Penny for your thoughts," Isaac said, breaking into her reverie. Beatrice managed a smile. "Just thinking about how different my life has become in such a short time. A few weeks ago, I was in Boston, preparing for this journey with such different expectations." "Do you regret coming west?" he asked, his tone curious but not judgmental. She considered the question seriously. "Despite everything that's happened, no, I don't believe I do," she answered truthfully. "There's something about this place, the openness, the freedom of it. It feels like a place where one can start anew." Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's what brought my parents here. The chance to build something of their own, away from the constraints of Virginia society." "And what about you?" Beatrice asked. "Have you ever wanted to leave, see other places?" "Thought about it once or twice," he admitted. "Especially after my mother died, but this land gets in your blood. It's home in a way that's hard to explain." As he spoke, his passion for the ranch and the life he'd built was evident, and Beatrice found herself drawn to that passion. Here was a man who knew exactly who he was and what he wanted, a rare quality indeed. The moment was broken by Martha calling them in for supper, but something had shifted between them. A connection had formed, tentative but undeniable, like a slender thread binding them together. The next day, Isaac drove Beatrice into Sweetwater in his buggy. It was her first time seeing the town, and she took in every detail eagerly. Main Street consisted of about 24 buildings, including a general store, a hotel, a bank, a church, and various other businesses. People walked along the wooden sidewalks, pausing to greet each other, the pace of life noticeably slower than in Boston. Isaac helped Beatrice down from the buggy in front of a whitewashed building with a small bell tower. "The schoolhouse," he said, gesturing toward it. Beatrice stood for a moment, taking in the sight. It was a simple structure, but well-maintained, with large windows to admit light and a small porch at the front. This would be her domain, where she would shape young minds and perhaps make a real difference in this community. "It's perfect," she said softly. Isaac smiled at her enthusiasm. "Let's go in. I've got the key from Mayor Wilson." The interior was a single large room with rows of desks facing a teacher's desk on a raised platform. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with well-worn textbooks, and a blackboard took up most of another. It was dusty from disuse, but Beatrice could immediately envision it filled with students, herself at the front guiding their learning. "How many students will I have?" she asked, running her hand along the smooth wood of the teacher's desk. "About 25, ranging from 6 to 16, Isaac replied. "Some of the older boys only come during the winter months when there's less work on the farms and ranches." Beatrice nodded, already planning how to manage the different age groups and educational levels. "I'll need to assess where each student stands academically and organize appropriate lessons." "You sound like you know what you're doing," Isaac observed. "I taught for 2 years at a girls' school in Boston," she explained. "But this will be different, mixed ages and genders, different backgrounds and needs." "You'll manage just fine," he said with confidence. "Anyone who can survive what you did and still be standing has the strength to handle a roomful of Texas children." His faith in her was touching, and Beatrice felt a rush of determination. She would make this work, would build a new life here in Sweetwater, despite the violent beginning to her Western adventure. After exploring the schoolhouse, they headed to the mayor's office. Herbert Wilson was a portly man with an impressive mustache and a booming voice. He welcomed Beatrice warmly, expressing outrage at her ordeal and relief that she was still willing to take the teaching position. "We've been without proper schooling for too long," he declared. "The children are running wild, and parents are at their wits' end. Having you here is a godsend, Miss Rawlins." "I'm eager to begin, Mayor Wilson," Beatrice assured him. They discussed practical matters, her salary, the condition of the teacherage, and the school's curriculum. By the time they left the mayor's office, Beatrice was officially employed as Sweetwater's new teacher, with her first day set for the following Monday. The rest of the day was spent acquiring necessities. At the general store, Isaac insisted on purchasing basic toiletries, writing materials, and other essentials for her. Then they visited Mrs. Abernathy, who took Beatrice's measurements and promised to have 2 everyday dresses and 1 Sunday dress ready within days. "I'll pay you back for all of this," Beatrice told Isaac as they headed back to the ranch late in the afternoon. "No rush," he replied easily. "Consider it a welcome gift to Sweetwater." The generosity of this man continued to amaze her. In the short time she'd known him, Isaac Flynn had saved her life, opened his home to her, and now outfitted her with everything she needed to start over. How could she not be drawn to him? As the buggy rolled along the dusty road back to the ranch, Beatrice found herself stealing glances at Isaac's profile. The setting sun gilded his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the slight curl of his hair where it escaped his hat. When he caught her looking and smiled, the warmth in his eyes made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with her recovery. She was falling for Isaac Flynn, Beatrice realized, with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, and that complicated everything. The next few days passed in a flurry of preparation. Beatrice spent hours in Isaac's library, reviewing textbooks and planning lessons for her diverse group of students. Isaac had brought her a register from the mayor, listing all the children who would be attending, their ages, and their grade levels. She studied it carefully, trying to familiarize herself with the names before meeting them in person. Isaac, meanwhile, continued his ranch work, but made time each evening to sit with her, listening as she talked through her plans and offering insights about the families in Sweetwater. His knowledge of the community was invaluable, helping her understand the backgrounds and circumstances of her future students. "The Jensen twins can be a handful," he warned her with a smile. "Smart as whips, but full of mischief. Their father works for me as a foreman, good man, but too busy to keep them in line since their mother passed last winter." "I'll keep a close eye on them," Beatrice promised, making a note beside the names Tommy and Timmy Jensen, age 10. "And the Prescott girl, Sarah, she's shy but brilliant with numbers. Her father doesn't see much value in educating girls, so you might need to encourage her specially." Beatrice frowned at this. "I believe girls deserve education just as much as boys." "As do I," Isaac agreed. "My mother was the most educated person in these parts, man or woman. Taught me to value learning above almost everything else." These conversations often extended late into the evening, with Martha occasionally bringing them coffee and thinly disguised looks of approval. It was clear the housekeeper had taken note of the growing connection between them and seemed pleased by it. On Sunday evening, the night before Beatrice was to start teaching, she found herself too nervous to sleep. After tossing and turning for an hour, she decided to go downstairs for some warm milk, hoping it might help her relax. The house was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, however, Beatrice noticed a light coming from the study. Curious, she approached the partially open door. Isaac was sitting at his desk, head bent over what appeared to be account books, a single lamp casting his face in golden light and shadow. He looked tired but focused, completely absorbed in his work. Beatrice hesitated, not wanting to disturb him, but something must have alerted him to her presence because he suddenly looked up, his expression softening when he saw her. "Beatrice," he said, setting down his pen. "Is everything all right?" "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, pushing the door open further. "Too nervous about tomorrow, I suppose. I didn't mean to interrupt your work." "You're not interrupting," he assured her, gesturing for her to come in. "Ranch accounts can wait. Come sit." Beatrice entered the study, a cozy room lined with more bookshelves and featuring a comfortable leather armchair beside a small fireplace. The walls were decorated with a few paintings, landscapes of the Texas countryside, and a framed map of the Flynn Ranch property. "This is a lovely room," she commented, taking the offered seat. "Do you spend much time in here?" "Too much, according to Martha," Isaac replied with a rueful smile. "Running a ranch this size involves more paperwork than most people realize." "It must be a tremendous responsibility," Beatrice observed. Isaac nodded, rubbing a hand over his face tiredly. "There are days when it feels overwhelming. Drought, disease, cattle rustlers, market prices, so many things beyond my control that can make or break a season. Yet you seem to manage it all with such composure." she said admiringly. He gave a short laugh. Appearances can be deceiving, but enough about my worries. Tell me why you're nervous about tomorrow. I've seen how thoroughly you've prepared. Beatrice sighed, grateful for the chance to voice her concerns. What if the children don't respect me? What if I can't maintain discipline? I'm not exactly an imposing figure, especially now. Her injuries had healed considerably, but she still bore a fading bruise on her cheekbone and occasionally winced when she moved too quickly. Children respect fairness and consistency more than physical intimidation, Isaac said thoughtfully. My best teacher was a woman not much bigger than you, but she ran her classroom like a general commanding troops. We all adored her because she was tough but fair, and she genuinely cared about our learning. What was her name? Beatrice asked. Miss Abigail Thornton, Isaac replied, a fond smile touching his lips. Taught here in Sweetwater for nearly 20 years before retiring, still lives on the edge of town with her sister. Perhaps I should visit her, seek her advice, Beatrice mused. I think she'd like that, Isaac agreed. But for now, try not to worry too much about tomorrow. The children of Sweetwater have been without proper schooling for weeks. They'll be too curious about you to cause much trouble on the first day. His reassurance helped calm her nerves, and they fell into a comfortable conversation about books they'd both enjoyed, discovering a shared love of Dickens and a mutual dislike of excessively sentimental poetry. It was easy talking with Isaac, Beatrice realized. He listened attentively, valued her opinions, and made her laugh with his dry observations. Before she knew it, the grandfather clock in the hall was striking 11. Goodness, it's late, she exclaimed, rising from her chair. And you have early work tomorrow. As do you, Schoolmarm Rawlins, Isaac teased gently, standing as well. They were suddenly very close in the small space between desk and chair. Beatrice could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, the slight stubble darkening his jaw, the way his hair curled at his temples. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he might lean down and kiss her. Part of her desperately wanted him to. Instead, Isaac stepped back, clearing his throat. I'll have breakfast ready early so we can get you to the schoolhouse with plenty of time to prepare, he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. Thank you, Isaac, Beatrice replied, hoping her disappointment didn't show in her face. For everything. Sleep well, Beatrice, he said softly as she moved toward the door. You too, she answered, and made her way back upstairs, her thoughts in turmoil. She wanted Isaac Flynn to kiss her. More than that, she was falling in love with him. The realization should have frightened her, given her history with Edward and the precariousness of her new position in Sweetwater, but instead, it filled her with a strange sort of peace. Whatever happened, at least she could trust her heart's recognition of a good man when she finally met one. Monday morning dawned clear and hot, a typical late summer day in Texas. Beatrice dressed carefully in one of her new dresses from Mrs. Abernathy, a practical navy blue with white collar and cuffs, and arranged her hair in a simple but neat style. She wanted to appear professional and approachable to her new students. Isaac was waiting for her in the kitchen, where Martha had prepared a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Eat up, Martha instructed. Can't teach on an empty stomach. You look nice, Isaac said quietly as Beatrice took her seat. Very much the schoolteacher. That's the idea, she replied with a smile, though inside she was a bundle of nerves. After breakfast, Isaac drove her to town in the buggy, the same one they'd used on their previous trip. The journey passed too quickly for Beatrice's liking, her anxiety growing with each mile. You'll be magnificent, Isaac assured her as they pulled up in front of the schoolhouse. Several children were already waiting outside with their parents, eyeing the buggy curiously. I hope so, Beatrice murmured, straightening her collar nervously. Isaac surprised her by taking her hand and giving it a reassuring squeeze. Remember, these children need you. Just be yourself and they'll respond. The simple touch and his words of encouragement steadied her. Drawing a deep breath, Beatrice allowed Isaac to help her down from the buggy, then turned to face her new students and their parents with a confident smile. Good morning, she greeted them. I'm Miss Rawlins, your new teacher. I'm very much looking forward to getting to know all of you. A chorus of good morning, Miss Rawlins came from the children, some enthusiastic, others more hesitant. Mayor Wilson stepped forward from the small crowd. "We're mighty pleased to have you here, Miss Rawlins. Folks, let's give our new teacher a proper Sweetwater welcome." There was a smattering of applause, and Beatrice felt her nervousness begin to fade as several parents approached to introduce themselves and their children. Isaac stood quietly to the side, watching with a proud smile that made her heart flutter. After the introductions, the children filed into the schoolhouse while their parents dispersed to their daily activities. Isaac lingered by the buggy. "I'll be back to pick you up at 3, he said. "Unless you'd rather I not know," Beatrice interrupted quickly. "Please do come." "I'd appreciate the ride back to the ranch," he nodded, seeming pleased. "Good luck today. You'll do wonderfully." With those words of encouragement, he climbed back into the buggy and drove away, leaving Beatrice to face her first day as Sweetwater's schoolteacher. The day was a whirlwind of activity. After introductions and assessing the students' various levels of knowledge, Beatrice organized them into groups based on their abilities rather than strictly by age. She set the older students to help the younger ones with basic reading while she worked with the middle group on arithmetic, moving between the groups throughout the day. There were challenges, of course. The Jensen twins lived up to their reputation for mischief, attempting to put a small lizard in Sarah Prescott's desk. But Beatrice caught them in the act and assigned them the task of cleaning the blackboards after school as punishment. They accepted this with surprising good grace, and Beatrice suspected they were testing her boundaries rather than being genuinely malicious. By the time 3 o'clock arrived, Beatrice was exhausted but exhilarated. She'd connected with her students, established clear expectations, and even managed to teach them something amid all the organizational challenges. As the last child left the schoolhouse, she sank into her chair with a weary sigh of satisfaction. A knock at the open door made her look up. Isaac stood there, hat in hand, a question in his eyes. "How was it?" Beatrice couldn't help the broad smile that spread across her face. "Wonderful, challenging, exhausting, but wonderful." The relief and happiness in Isaac's expression made her heart swell. "I knew you'd be a natural," he said. "The children already look more civilized than they have in weeks," she laughed at that. "Hardly, but we've made a start. The Jensen twins are every bit as mischievous as you warned, but I think they're just bored and intelligent. I'll need to keep them challenged." As she gathered her things, Beatrice recounted the day's events to Isaac, who listened attentively, asking questions and offering insights about the various children. By the time they reached the buggy, she felt as though she'd known him for years rather than mere weeks. The ride back to the ranch was pleasant, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the landscape. Beatrice found herself relaxing in Isaac's company, the day's tension melting away as they discussed her plans for the coming weeks. "I think I'll organize a small library corner," she mused. "Some of the older students have read everything in the schoolhouse already. Perhaps people in town might donate books they've finished. I could contribute some from the ranch," Isaac offered. "Mother would have liked that, sharing her love of reading with the next generation." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Beatrice said softly. "I wish I could have met her." Isaac's expression turned wistful. "She would have liked you, always said education was wasted unless it was shared." They fell silent for a moment, each lost in thought as the buggy rolled along the dusty road. Then Isaac cleared his throat. "I was thinking," he began hesitantly, "that perhaps we might celebrate your first week of teaching with a special dinner on Friday. Martha's been talking about making her famous peach cobbler, and we could invite Mayor Wilson and his wife, maybe Doc Jenkins and a few others. Let folks get to know you better." Beatrice was touched by the suggestion. "That sounds lovely, Isaac. Are you sure it wouldn't be too much trouble?" "Not at all," he assured her. "It's high time the ranch hosted some social gathering. Been too long since there was proper entertaining at Flynn Ranch." The idea of helping Isaac bring life and community back to his home appealed to Beatrice enormously. "Then I accept. It will be a wonderful way to end my first week." The smile Isaac gave her was worth any amount of additional fatigue she might feel after a full week of teaching. There was something so genuine about his pleasure in her acceptance that it made her heart swell with affection for this kind, thoughtful man. The week passed in a blur of lessons, getting to know her students and settling into a routine. Each morning, Isaac would drive her to the schoolhouse, and each afternoon, he would return to bring her home to the ranch. These daily journeys became precious time together, filled with conversation and growing connection. On Thursday afternoon, as they were about to leave the schoolhouse, Sheriff Campbell appeared at the door, his expression grave. "Miss Rawlins, Flynn," he greeted them with a nod. "Got a moment to talk?" "Of course, Sheriff," Isaac replied, his posture tensing slightly. "What can we do for you?" Campbell removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. "Got some news about the Garfield gang. Posse caught up with them near the Mexico border yesterday." Beatrice's heart began to race. These were the men who had attacked her, killed the stagecoach driver and Mr. Phillips, and left her to die in the desert. "Did you capture them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The sheriff's face was solemn. "There was a shootout. 2 of them were killed brothers, Luke and Matthew Garfield. The third, James Garfield, was wounded but managed to escape into Mexico. We're working with authorities there, but—" He shrugged, the gesture conveying the difficulties of cross-border law enforcement. Isaac moved closer to Beatrice, his presence steadying. "Did you recover any of Miss Rawlins' belongings?" "Some," Campbell replied, nodding. "Found a trunk with ladies' items that matches the description. It's at my office now if you'd like to come identify it." "Yes," Beatrice said immediately. "Please." The 3 of them walked to the sheriff's office, where a familiar trunk sat in the corner. Beatrice approached it with trembling hands, tears filling her eyes as she recognized the brass fittings and her initials engraved on the lid. "That's mine," she confirmed, running her fingers over the worn leather. The sheriff nodded. "It's been broken into, of course. Can't say how much is still inside, but you're welcome to check it now." Kneeling beside the trunk, Beatrice opened it carefully. Many of her belongings were gone: the silver hairbrush her mother had given her, the small pouch of money she'd saved, some of her finer dresses. But her teaching credentials were still there, tucked into a book they'd apparently deemed worthless, along with several personal items of sentimental rather than monetary value. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said, clutching the book containing her credentials to her chest. "This means more than I can express." "Just doing my job, madam," Campbell replied, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Flynn, if you could help Miss Rawlins get this trunk to your buggy, I'll consider the matter closed for now. We'll keep looking for James Garfield, of course." "Of course," Isaac agreed, already moving to lift the trunk. "And we appreciate all your efforts, Sheriff." As they left the office, Beatrice felt a strange mixture of emotions: relief at having some of her belongings returned, sadness for the loss of others, and a lingering unease knowing that one of her attackers was still at large, possibly across the border in Mexico. Isaac seemed to sense her turmoil. "Are you all right?" he asked gently as he secured her trunk in the back of the buggy. Beatrice nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again, confused by her own feelings. "I'm glad to have my credentials and some of my things back," she said slowly. "But knowing one of them is still out there, James Garfield won't dare show his face in these parts again," Isaac assured her, helping her up into the buggy. "And you're safe at the ranch, I promise you that." His words comforted her, as did his steady presence beside her as they drove back to the ranch. Beatrice realized that despite the lingering fear from her ordeal, she felt truly safe with Isaac. More than that, she felt at home in a way she never had in Boston, not even before Edward's betrayal. The dinner party on Friday evening was a resounding success. Martha outdid herself with a feast of roast beef, potatoes, fresh vegetables from the ranch garden, and her famous peach cobbler for dessert. Mayor Wilson and his wife attended, along with Doc Jenkins, the Reverend and Mrs. Patterson from the church, and a few other prominent citizens of Sweetwater. Beatrice wore her new Sunday dress, a becoming sage green that brought out the hazel in her eyes, and arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than she used for teaching. When she came downstairs and saw the appreciation in Isaac's eyes, she knew the extra effort had been worthwhile. "You look beautiful," he murmured as he offered her his arm to lead her into the dining room where their guests were gathering. "Thank you," she replied, a blush warming her cheeks. "You look quite handsome yourself." It was true. Isaac had traded his usual work clothes for a well-tailored dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame. His black hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his stubble to a precise line along his jaw. He looked every inch the successful rancher, confident and distinguished. The conversation at dinner flowed easily, with much of it focusing on Beatrice's first week of teaching and her impressions of Sweetwater. She found herself genuinely enjoying the company and the chance to get to know the community better. "The children have taken to you remarkably well," Mrs. Wilson commented. "My Sarah hasn't stopped talking about you all week. Miss Rawlins says this and Miss Rawlins showed us that." It's a refreshing change from her usual silence about school. "Sarah is a delight," Beatrice replied sincerely. "She has a natural aptitude for mathematics that I'm encouraging." "Mathematics," Mr. Wilson looked surprised. "For a girl, absolutely," Beatrice said firmly. "Girls are just as capable of mathematical thinking as boys. Sarah could have a future as a bookkeeper or accountant with her skills." There was a brief silence at the table, and Beatrice worried she'd overstepped, but then Isaac spoke up. "Miss Rawlins is quite right," he said, his voice carrying the natural authority that came from his position in the community. "My mother kept all the ranch accounts until her death, and more accurately than any man could have done. Education shouldn't be limited by gender." His support warmed Beatrice's heart, and the conversation moved on to other topics. Throughout the evening, she was increasingly aware of Isaac's presence, the way he skillfully guided discussions, made sure everyone was comfortable, and occasionally caught her eye with a private smile that seemed meant only for her. After dinner, the men retired to the study for brandy and cigars, while the women gathered in the parlor. Beatrice found herself deep in conversation with Mrs. Patterson about organizing a small library at the church for those who couldn't afford books of their own. "It's a wonderful idea, Mrs. Patterson enthused. "The Reverend has been saying for years that we need to promote literacy beyond the schoolhouse. Not everyone can attend formal education, especially the adults who never had the opportunity." "Exactly," Beatrice agreed, "and reading opens so many doors. It's not just about practical knowledge, but about expanding one's horizons, experiencing different perspectives." "You sound just like Elizabeth Flynn," Martha commented as she served coffee. "She was always saying similar things." Mrs. Wilson nodded approvingly. "You would have liked her, Miss Rawlins, and she would have thoroughly approved of you." The implication behind these comments wasn't lost on Beatrice. The women of Sweetwater had noticed the growing connection between her and Isaac and seemed to be giving their blessing. The thought made her both nervous and pleased. When the men rejoined them later, Isaac immediately came to Beatrice's side, his eyes warm as he asked if she was enjoying herself. The easy way they interacted, finishing each other's thoughts and sharing glances that conveyed unspoken understanding, did not go unnoticed by their guests. As the evening drew to a close and the last guests departed, Isaac and Beatrice stood on the porch, waving goodbye to the Wilsons' buggy as it disappeared down the drive. "That went well, I think," Isaac said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Very well," Beatrice agreed. "Everyone was so welcoming and kind." "They like you," he replied simply. "As they should." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, gazing up at the star-filled Texas sky. The night was warm but not uncomfortable, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "Would you care to walk for a bit?" Isaac asked suddenly. "It's a beautiful night and there's something I'd like to show you." Curious, Beatrice nodded. "I'd like that." Isaac offered his arm and she took it, acutely aware of his solid strength beside her as they strolled away from the house. He led her along a path that wound up a small rise behind the main buildings, where a single oak tree stood silhouetted against the night sky. "This was my mother's favorite spot on the ranch," Isaac explained as they approached the tree. "She used to come up here to read or just to think." Said it gave her perspective on things. Under the spreading branches of the oak, a simple bench had been placed, offering a view of the entire Flynn Ranch spread out below and beyond it, the twinkling lights of distant Sweetwater. "It's beautiful," Beatrice breathed, taking in the panoramic vista. "She always said that too," Isaac replied softly. "When things got difficult drought years, or when Father was being particularly stubborn about something she'd come up here to remind herself of the bigger picture. They sat on the bench, still arm in arm, the contact feeling natural and right. Beatrice could sense that Isaac had brought her here for a reason, that this spot held special significance for him. "Beatrice," he began after a moment, his voice hesitant in a way she'd never heard before. "These past weeks, having you at the ranch, getting to know you, it's changed things for me." Her heart began to beat faster. "How so?" she asked, hardly daring to hope what his answer might be. Isaac turned slightly to face her, his expression earnest in the moonlight. "Before I found you in the desert, I'd settled into a kind of solitary existence. After things ended with Caroline, I convinced myself I was better off alone, focusing on the ranch, carrying on my father's legacy. But then you came into my life, and suddenly everything feels different." Beatrice held her breath, scarcely able to believe what she was hearing. "You're remarkable," he continued, taking her hand in his. "Your strength after everything you've been through, your kindness to everyone you meet, your passion for teaching, your intelligence. I find myself thinking about you constantly." "Isaac," she whispered, emotion making it hard to speak. "I know it's soon," he hurried on. "We've only known each other a short while, and you're just getting established in Sweetwater, finding your footing as the new teacher. The last thing I want is to complicate that for you, but I couldn't keep my feelings to myself any longer." He took a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Beatrice Rawlins. I think I started falling the moment I found you in that desert, though I didn't recognize it then." Joy surged through Beatrice, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Oh, Isaac," she said, squeezing his hand. "I feel the same way. I've been trying to tell myself it was too soon, that after what happened with Edward back in Boston, I should be more cautious with my heart. But the truth is, I've never felt this way about anyone before." "Edward?" Isaac questioned, his brow furrowing slightly. Beatrice realized she'd never told him about her former fiancé. "A man I was engaged to in Boston," she explained. "He was not who I thought he was. He was courting me for my small inheritance while seeing another woman. When I discovered his betrayal, I broke the engagement. It was the scandal that prompted me to answer the advertisement for a teacher in Sweetwater." Isaac's expression darkened. "The man's a fool," he said firmly. "And I'm selfishly glad for his foolishness as it brought you here, to Sweetwater. To me." Their eyes met in the moonlight, and Beatrice saw in Isaac's gaze all the things she'd been longing for: honesty, strength, kindness, and yes, love. Here was a man who had saved her life in more ways than one, who respected her mind and her independence, who saw her for exactly who she was and cherished her for it. "Isaac," she said softly, "I think I'm past falling. I love you." His face transformed with joy, and he raised a hand to gently cup her cheek. "May I kiss you, Beatrice?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. "Please," she whispered, when his lips met hers. It was tender and questioning at first, then deepening as she responded with all the love in her heart. His arms encircled her, drawing her close, and Beatrice felt as though she'd finally found where she belonged here in Texas, under a star-filled sky, in the embrace of a good and honorable man. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I hadn't planned on declaring myself tonight," he admitted with a small laugh. "Was going to give you more time to settle in, but sitting here in my mother's special place with you beside me, it just felt right." "It was perfect," Beatrice assured him, her heart full to bursting. "And for what it's worth, I think your mother would approve." Isaac smiled, pressing another soft kiss to her lips. "I know she would." They stayed on the bench for a long while, talking quietly, sharing more of their pasts and beginning to dream of a future together. It was late when they finally walked back to the house, hand in hand, both knowing that something precious and lasting had begun that night under the old oak tree. The following weeks were a time of joy and deepening connection for Beatrice and Isaac. By day, she taught her students with increasing confidence, implementing new ideas and watching with satisfaction as they responded to her methods. By evening, she and Isaac would share the events of their day over dinner, then often retire to the study where they would read together or simply talk, discovering more about each other with each passing day. On weekends, Isaac took her riding across the ranch, showing her his favorite places and teaching her about cattle ranching. Beatrice proved to be a quick study, her natural intelligence and curiosity making her eager to learn everything about her new home. Their courtship progressed at a measured pace, respectful of Beatrice's position in the community as the schoolteacher and mindful of the gossip that might arise if they moved too quickly. Martha, however, observed their growing relationship with undisguised approval, often finding excuses to leave them alone together in the evenings. 3 weeks after their first kiss, Isaac received news that the teacherage in town was finally repaired and ready for occupancy. The information brought both of them to a moment of reckoning. "The mayor says you can move in this weekend if you wish," Isaac told Beatrice as they sat in the study after dinner. "Everything's been cleaned and prepared," Beatrice nodded slowly. This was what they'd been waiting for. The arrangement had always been temporary, with her staying at the ranch only until the teacherage was ready. But now that the moment had arrived, she was reluctant to leave. "I suppose that makes the most sense," she said carefully, watching Isaac's face. "It would be more convenient for school and more proper." Isaac set aside the book he'd been holding and leaned forward in his chair. "Is that what you want, Beatrice, to move into town?" She hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. "No," she admitted. "These weeks at the ranch have been the happiest of my life. The thought of leaving, of not seeing you every day, of not sharing meals and conversations and—" She blushed slightly. "And kisses, it makes my heart ache." Relief flooded Isaac's features. "Then don't go," he said simply. "But what would people say? The schoolteacher living at the ranch of an unmarried man, no matter how respectable the circumstances. There would be talk." Isaac rose from his chair and came to kneel beside her, taking both her hands in his. "Then marry me," he said, his eyes intense and sincere. "Stay here as my wife. I know it's soon, perhaps too soon by Eastern standards, but life moves differently out here. When you find something precious, you don't let it slip away." Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. "Isaac, are you certain? Marriage is such a serious step." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," he replied without hesitation. "I love you, Beatrice Rawlins. I want to build a life with you, to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to watch you teach our children someday, to grow old together on this land." Tears of joy filled Beatrice's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Isaac Flynn." He surged up to capture her lips in a kiss full of promise and passion, pulling her into his arms as though he never intended to let her go. When they finally parted, both were smiling so widely it almost hurt. "When?" Isaac asked, still holding her close. "How soon can you be ready?" Beatrice laughed at his eagerness. "We should at least give the Reverend time to post the banns, and I'll need a proper dress." 2 weeks, Isaac declared. "Is that enough time?" 2 weeks it is," she agreed, her heart so full of happiness she thought it might burst. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Sweetwater. Most of the townspeople had already observed the growing attachment between their new schoolteacher and the owner of Flynn Ranch, so the announcement came as a pleasant confirmation rather than a surprise. Mayor Wilson formally congratulated them and assured Beatrice that marriage would not affect her position as teacher. "In fact," he told her, "we'd prefer a married teacher. More stability, you know. The last unmarried teacher we had left us high and dry. But you and Flynn, you'll be putting down roots here." Mrs. Abernathy immediately began work on a wedding dress, refusing to accept payment. "Consider it my gift to you both," she insisted. "It's about time Isaac Flynn had some happiness in his life, and you're just what he needs." The women of Sweetwater rallied around Beatrice, offering advice, support, and helping with wedding preparations. Mrs. Patterson organized a small gathering at the church, where the ladies presented Beatrice with household items and linens as wedding gifts. "Not that the Flynn Ranch needs more linens," Martha commented dryly when Beatrice returned with her bounty, "but it's their way of welcoming you properly." "It's very kind of them," Beatrice said, touched by the community's acceptance. Martha snorted. "Kind, yes, but also practical. They know a good match when they see one. Isaac is the most eligible bachelor in the county, and you're educated, pretty, and good with children. Everyone's relieved he finally came to his senses and found himself a proper wife. Beatrice blushed at the housekeeper's blunt assessment, but couldn't deny the pleasure it gave her to know their union was so well regarded in the community. For his part, Isaac threw himself into preparations with characteristic thoroughness. He had carpenters expand and update the master bedroom, ordered new furniture from San Antonio, and spent long hours ensuring the ranch was running smoothly so he could take time away after the wedding for a brief honeymoon. "I thought we might go to San Antonio for a week," he told Beatrice as they sat on the porch swing one evening, enjoying the cool night air. "Stay at the Menger Hotel, see some sights. Would you like that?" "It sounds wonderful," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Though I admit, I'm just as happy at the thought of coming back here afterward to our home." Isaac pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Our home," he repeated, satisfaction evident in his tone. "I like the sound of that." The day before the wedding, Beatrice moved her few belongings from the guest room into what would be their shared bedroom. The space had been transformed, the old furniture replaced with a beautiful new mahogany bedroom set, the walls freshly painted, new curtains hanging at the windows. A book she'd mentioned wanting to read lay on what would be her bedside table, along with a small silver frame containing a pressed wildflower from their walk to the oak tree. The thoughtfulness of these gestures brought tears to her eyes. How different Isaac was from Edward, whose idea of romance had been showy gifts meant to impress others rather than small, meaningful gestures that spoke directly to her heart. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, as though even the weather was celebrating their union. The ceremony was held in Sweetwater's small church, which was filled to capacity with townspeople and ranch hands. Beatrice wore the elegant white dress Mrs. Abernathy had created, with tiny pearls sewn into the bodice and a veil of delicate lace. Isaac, waiting for her at the altar in a new black suit, looked at her with such love and wonder as she walked down the aisle that Beatrice felt her heart might overflow with happiness. The Reverend Patterson's ceremony was simple but moving, speaking of love, commitment, and building a life together on the foundation of mutual respect and shared values. When Isaac slipped a gold band onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her for all his days, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared. "Mr. Flynn, you may kiss your bride." Isaac's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of all that was to come. When they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Flynn, the cheers and applause that greeted them felt like a blessing from the entire community. The celebration afterward was held at Flynn Ranch, with tables set up under the trees and lanterns strung from the branches to provide light as evening fell. There was music from a local fiddle player, dancing, and more food than Beatrice had ever seen in one place. Martha had outdone herself with the wedding feast, and the massive cake at the center of it all was a work of art. As the celebration continued into the night, Isaac led Beatrice away from the crowd to their special spot under the oak tree. The full moon illuminated the landscape, casting a silver glow over the ranch below. "Happy, Mrs. Flynn?" Isaac asked, drawing her into his arms. "Beyond words," Beatrice replied, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "If someone had told me 3 months ago that I would be standing here as your wife, I would have thought them mad. And yet now I can't imagine being anywhere else." "It was fate," Isaac said softly, stroking her hair. "Terrible circumstances brought you into my path, but something greater than chance kept you in my life." Beatrice looked up at him, love swelling in her heart. "I believe you're right, and I'm grateful every day that you found me in that desert." "As am I," he murmured, lowering his head to capture her lips in a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and happiness to come. 6 months later, Beatrice stood at the front of her classroom, watching with pride as her students presented their history projects to parents and community members. The school had flourished under her guidance, with attendance higher than ever before, and even some of the older boys choosing to continue their education rather than leaving for full-time work. Isaac sat in the back row, his face alight with pride as he watched his wife in her element. Though they'd been married only half a year, they'd settled into a rhythm of life together that felt as natural as breathing. Beatrice continued teaching during the week, while taking an active interest in the ranch operations on weekends and holidays. Isaac supported her career wholeheartedly while gradually teaching her everything she needed to know about running Flynn Ranch. Their life together wasn't without challenges. The drought that summer had been severe, forcing difficult decisions about cattle and water usage. And there had been a tense week when rumors circulated that James Garfield, the last surviving member of the gang that had attacked Beatrice, had been spotted across the border in Texas again. Isaac had insisted on escorting Beatrice everywhere during that time, and Sheriff Campbell had increased patrols, but nothing had come of the rumors. Through it all, their love and partnership had only strengthened. Each challenge faced together had bound them more tightly to one another, deepening their trust and commitment. As the school presentation concluded and parents began to congratulate their children, Beatrice made her way through the crowd to Isaac's side. "You were magnificent," he told her, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "The children have learned so much under your guidance." "They're eager students," she replied modestly, though his praise warmed her heart. "And they have supportive parents, which makes all the difference." Mayor Wilson approached them, beaming with approval. "Another success, Mrs. Flynn," he declared. "The town council couldn't be more pleased with the progress you've made with our school." "Thank you, Mayor," Beatrice replied. "The children deserve all the credit." After chatting with a few more parents and helping the children clean up their projects, Beatrice and Isaac finally headed home to the ranch. In the buggy, she leaned against his shoulder, fatigue from the long day catching up with her. "Tired?" Isaac asked, wrapping an arm around her. "A bit," she admitted, "but it's a good tired, the kind that comes from worthwhile work." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves and the familiar landscape lulling Beatrice into a peaceful state. As they approached the ranch, the setting sun bathed everything in golden light, making their home look like something from a dream. "I have news," she said suddenly, sitting up straighter. Isaac glanced at her curiously. "What kind of news?" Beatrice took a deep breath. She'd been waiting for the right moment to tell him, and somehow this quiet journey home together seemed perfect. "I visited Doc Jenkins yesterday during my free period," she began, watching his face. "I've been feeling a bit unwell in the mornings lately, and I wanted his opinion." Isaac's expression immediately turned concerned. "Are you ill? Why didn't you tell me you weren't feeling well?" "Because I suspected the cause, and I wanted to be sure before I said anything," she replied, unable to keep a smile from spreading across her face. "Isaac, we're going to have a baby." In about 7 months, according to Doc Jenkins. The buggy came to an abrupt halt as Isaac pulled sharply on the reins, his eyes wide with wonder and joy. "A baby," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're going to have a child." Beatrice nodded, her own eyes filling with happy tears at his reaction. "Yes, our child, Isaac, a little Flynn to carry on your legacy." With a whoop of joy, Isaac gathered her into his arms, nearly lifting her from the seat in his enthusiasm. "A baby," he exclaimed, pressing kisses to her face, her hair, anywhere he could reach. "Oh, Beatrice, this is wonderful news. Are you feeling all right? Is there anything you need? Should you be resting more?" She laughed at his rapid-fire questions, her heart full of love for this man who'd saved her life in the desert heat and now was giving her a new life to nurture. "I'm feeling fine, just a little queasy in the mornings. Doc Jenkins says it's perfectly normal and that I'm healthy as can be." "Thank God," Isaac murmured, placing a gentle hand over her still flat stomach with reverence. "A baby, our baby." They continued home in a haze of happiness, making plans and sharing dreams for their child's future. By the time they reached the ranch, the news had sunk in enough for Isaac to contain his excitement and help Beatrice down from the buggy with even more care than usual. Martha took one look at their faces as they entered the house and narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "What are you two looking so pleased about?" she demanded. Isaac glanced at Beatrice, who nodded her permission for him to share the news. "Martha," he said, his voice brimming with pride, "come spring, there'll be a new member of the Flynn family." The housekeeper's stern expression melted into one of pure joy. A baby, oh my dears, that's the most wonderful news. She rushed forward to embrace Beatrice, then Isaac, tears glistening in her eyes. This house has needed the sound of children for too long. Your mother would be so happy, Isaac. That night, lying in bed with Beatrice nestled in his arms, Isaac pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. Do you ever think about how we met? He asked softly. How close we came to never finding each other at all. Beatrice nodded against his chest. If you hadn't decided to ride that particular stretch that day, if you hadn't seen me in the desert. I still remember how you looked, he murmured. So brave, even when you were barely conscious. The first thing you did when you woke was thank me, despite all you'd been through. You gave me water when I was dying of thirst, she replied simply. You saved my life. Isaac's arms tightened around her. And you saved mine, though in a different way. I was existing, not living, before you came along. Going through the motions, doing my duty to the ranch, to my father's memory. You brought joy back into my world, Beatrice. She raised herself up slightly to look into his face, touched by his words. We saved each other then, she said softly. And now we're building something new together, this marriage, this baby, our future. I love you, Isaac whispered, his hand gently cradling the place where their child was growing, more than I ever thought possible. And I love you, Beatrice replied, her heart full to bursting with happiness and gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this man, this place, this life. As they drifted toward sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Beatrice reflected on the strange and wondrous path that had led her here. From the terror and pain of being beaten and abandoned in the desert, to the joy of lying in her husband's embrace. Carrying their child beneath her heart, life had taken her on an unexpected journey, but had ultimately brought her exactly where she belonged. In the years that followed, Flynn Ranch prospered under Isaac and Beatrice's joint stewardship. Their son, William, was born the following spring, a healthy, robust boy with his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Elizabeth, named for Isaac's mother, with a quick mind and inquisitive nature that promised she would keep her parents on their toes. Beatrice continued teaching until shortly before Elizabeth's birth, then made the difficult but fulfilling decision to focus on raising their children and helping with the ranch. She didn't abandon education entirely. However, she established a small school on the ranch for the children of the workers, teaching basic reading, writing, and arithmetic several days a week. This arrangement allowed her to use her skills while still being present for her own children's formative years. Isaac's pride in his wife and children knew no bounds. He was a devoted father who made time for his family, despite the demands of running the ranch, teaching William about cattle and horses from an early age, and never dismissing Elizabeth's equally keen interest in ranch operations. Together, they built a home filled with love, learning, and laughter, a legacy that would endure long after them. Rooted in the moment, a cowboy found a beaten woman in the desert heat and gave her all his water, beginning a love story as vast and enduring as the Texas landscape itself.